we've had a long pause with Horeb, and we paused just before we got into the Malachas of Shabbos. We had talked a great deal about why Shabbos is important, what it means, what its significance is, all the different roles it plays in Jewish life. Now Rav Hirsch is going to get into the actual observance of Shabbos and the foundation of it, which is the 39 Malachas, translated loosely as 39 forms of work, that we are prohibited from doing. These Malachas are derived from the work that was done to build the Mishkan in the desert. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start on paragraph 147, which is the setup for the Malachas. For similar reasons, various things are forbidden on Shabbos by rabbinic decree, because they border on a Malacha. So we have the Av Malachas, the basic Malachas, and then we're going to have other kinds of sort of demi-Malachas that derive from them, or because they easily lead to a Malacha. In the first category, the category of those that border on Malacha, our sages have included in the prohibition everything that can be classed under the concept of production and change, even if it is only a change in relationship and designation. For example, they forbade the taking up of that which is not designated for use at the beginning of Shabbos. Tal muksa. Right? The idea of muksa comes from this. If you don't need it for Shabbos, you shouldn't pick it up. This is a widening of the concept of malacha, which really covers only an objective change, to include a mere alteration in a man's attitude to a thing in relation to himself. The basic malacha, namely the removal of an object from the communal domain, that of the basic malacha of carrying, into that of an individual or vice versa, which is also only a change of relationship in the space, forms a simple transition to this. Another example of the extension of the concept of direct production to include that of occasioning it indirectly, amir la'achim, the law of the Torah, which makes a man responsible for the productions of his servants or his animals, forms a transition in this. That is to say, the whole idea that you can't ask a non-Jew to do something you're forbidden to do on Shabbos.
Like opening up a light.
Like turning on a light, for instance. You can't ask him to turn on a light. There are very similar cases. The activities included under the section are self-explanatory. Everything which is prohibited on the Sabbath by the decree of the sages is called shavus. Right? That is to say, it's a rabbinic prohibition. Right? Mm-hmm. So now we'll have the list of malachas. Just a side story that from my wife, who grew up in the former Soviet Union, that there's an idea within Russian culture, not Jewish culture, but actually Russian culture, which is that you don't pass things through a doorway, through a transom. Right? People don't stand in the transom of the door, like where there's an arch, and hand something across. And there seems to be no explanation for why this is. And Yelena concluded, and it makes perfect sense, that the neighbors very often observe, we're often observed by non-Jews. And there is a belief that Jews know something secret, something special about the universe, about how things operate.
It's true.
Turns out it is true.
It's true.
It is true. We don't even know that we know it, but it's true. Right? And so we're often observed in our behavior, how we do things. Now, on Shabbos, one of the first laws you learn about Shabbos is you can't hand something through a window, through a door, because you're coming from a public domain to a private domain. So, for instance, there's an issue if the paper boy drops the paper on the sidewalk, right? You can't actually go and pick it up unless there's an error. Pick it up and bring it into the house, carry it into the house, because it's a couple of things. It's carrying and it's transferring from one domain to another. So you can't do it. So if a person were to stand outside the house and hand something in the doorway on a Shabbos, right? The person in the house would say, "No, don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't transfer it from public to private domain." The observers of this action would conclude that there's something wrong with transferring things across a transom in a home. and would say if the Jews don't do this, there must be a reason why they don't do this. So we're not going to do it. And this happens many times in the Russian culture. The holiday that we call Easter, they call Pascha. Pascha. Pesach. It's Pesach.
Pascal.
Pascha. That's what they call Pascha. Right, is the word for it, right? Because it comes at that time, right? And they understand that's what it is. Many other things. Anyway, let's go on to the Malachas, number 148 on page 67. The list of Malachas is 39 productive activities, Malachot, which are derived from the noblest product of human activity, the building of the Mishkan. The oral law of the Talmud defines the whole activity of man in connection with the prohibition of work on Shabbos. And we'll go through them now. Number 1, plowing, which includes loosening or clearing even the smallest piece of land for cultivation. Now what we're going to learn is these are the Av Malachas. These are the 39 father Malachas. There are Toldos, which are the children of these Malachas, that we'll learn about as well. But you'll see that there is a process in this, right? The first set of them that we're going to learn really have to do with the growth of things that are used either in the manufacture of fabric or the manufacture of dyes that are used in the Mishkan. Right? Number 2, sowing. That's what includes the promotion of growth. So there's a question, for instance, that's asked, nice summer day, right? You're lying on your lawn chair, and you decide, the sun is moving, right? I'm going to move my lawn chair out of the shade back into the sun. So, and your lawn chair has no wheels, right? So you pick up one end of it and you pull it to the new place, right? Have you plowed at that point, right? Is the question, right? So we won't deal with whether you have or not, but these are the children of plowing, right? Issues like this, right? So plowing, which includes the loosening or clearing even the smallest piece of land for cultivation, right? Sowing, that which includes any promotion of growth. Now the problem is that if you plowed, it could be that seeds from the grass could fall into the thing that you made, and you could be causing the grass to grow. So it might be an issue. Cutting corn, which includes detaching things from the place they're grown in order to use them for food or work. An example of this is that sometimes people grow watermelons. Watermelons have very, very long vines, right? So you can actually hand a watermelon before Shabbos and put it on your on the window edge, right? And it's still growing, right? You can't use that watermelon to serve on Shabbos because you're detaching it from the earth. Even though that earth could be 8 feet away, it's still connected. So you have to detach it prior to Shabbos in order to be able to use it at that time. Detaching things from the place of their growth in order to use them for food or work. This also includes plucking flowers. It includes when you go for a walk on Shabbos, not to be tempted to take a leaf or take anything that's growing from the ground at all with you. The other issues other reason not to as well, but specifically, as soon as you remove something that's growing, it's a problem.
I have a question.
Sure.
In building the Mishkan, in Jewish thought, especially with the Rebbe and others, it was building a house for Hashem to come down in. And so is Shabbos. Shabbos is considered in certain ways...
It's a palace in time.
A palace in time.
Yeah.
And the infinite comes down. So is the doing of work interfering with God coming down or blessing the Jewish people's Shabbos? Because there's another section in the Torah where God finishes creating, he turns around, says this is good, and blesses it. So if we do work, are we preventing Hashem from coming down to the house we built on the other 6 days? Is that the thinking behind it?
Specifically, let's call them malachas as opposed to work, because, as you know, that if you carry a 100-pound chair upstairs in your house, we don't call it malacha.
No, because there's a roof.
Right. Because it's within the house, right? On the other hand, if you turn off a light switch, which seems like a lot less work, you've committed an avera, right? That's a malacha. Right? So we'll call them malachas as opposed to work, because it could be confusing, right? So the question is, if you do malachas, right, does it prevent God's presence as being part of your life?
Yes.
Right. I would argue that it does. Now, I'm not sure that a person who doesn't keep Shabbos notices that that's happening. Right. That is to say, they may not feel, oh, there's something missing in my life on Shabbos, because it's filled with going to the ball game and shopping. Right? They may later on in life find a bit of a vacuum, and Shabbos is one of those things in which we have the opportunity to have a relationship to God that is greater than the rest of the week. There's no question about it. That's true. Not that God is not around all week long.
He's all the time.
24/7.
He's with us right now.
But one of the ideas, one of the definitions of malacha, and I think that Hirsch referred to it, is the idea of creation itself. Right? So we don't think that carrying the piece of furniture from downstairs to upstairs is a creative act. We do think that turning the lights on or off is a creative act. Right? And what we understand is that God rests from creating on this day. That is to say, he didn't go to sleep, but he did not. He had completed the process of creating that matter which was required for the universe at that point. Right? And one could argue that no new matter was created after that. I had a very long discussion with somebody the other day about the idea that basar b'chalav, mixtures of meat and milk, you can't derive any benefit from it. So, for instance, if you burn it, you have to make sure that the ashes are not used for people washing their hair. Sometimes people used to use ashes you can't do that, right? So you should flush it, right? So in the days in which they talked about flushing it, it was actually an outhouse. So then the question was, well, it turns into compost. Really, if it's in an outhouse, right? It's some kind of sewage, it ends up. Because the truth of the matter is, the matter, whatever it is, right, never actually disappears from the universe. Matter changes form, but overall, there's no new matter and no old matter that disappears.
But
right?
what does happen is that energy is being lost. That's the second law of thermodynamics.
Well, it's lost in the sense of we're unable to. Energy maybe, but matter itself is not, right?
Matter is not, but the organization of matter
for sure
goes from a higher to a lower.
For sure. But all I'm saying is that after the first Shabbos, right, there was no need to create any more matter. Right? So that was really the significance of that day when it says God rested from creating, right? It's not as though he never created again or anything like that. It really is that all of the elements required for the universe were now in place.
In place. That's, I think
they continue to evolve, they continue to expand, whatever, all the arguments, right? But that was, So on this day, each week, we remember this by ceasing from creating, which we do very actively, Jews especially, all week long, and we focus on, rather than creation, on the Creator. It gives us a moment to really engage in a relationship with the Creator rather than simply as creation. We actively are involved in this creation nonstop, for the 6 days of the week, and it seems like we have less focus in general on the Creator of the creation during those days, but we definitely have it on Shabbos. That's really becomes the center of our focus, as individuals and as families and as people.
And in the sense that when we do keep Shabbos, we're acting just like God did, because he turned around and said, look at what I created, it's good, and blessed it.
I would say that we're acting like his firstborn more than like God. That's to say, the firstborn wants to be like, just like Joshua wanted to be like Moshe, right? Or to say we're acting like God as opposed to acting as God is also okay with me.
Well, nobody can act like God.
Right.
But we try to imitate.
But we're trying. That's right. It's a time where we focus on those qualities of God that we try to understand, and that we try to imbue them in ourselves more actively as well. And clearly, it's not simply. It's not simply every seventh day. It is Shabbos itself. It is the nature of Shabbos. It's the nature of this day. We know that each of the 6 days is paired with another one of the 6 days. Shabbos was left alone. Shabbos was on its own. And Shabbos was paired with us, for this purpose. So let's go on a little further. Okay, so we did cutting from the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Binding sheaves, right? So after you've harvested, you bind your sheaves. Binding sheaves, which includes gathering a severed product from the place of its growth. This would also include, say, picking up apples that fell on the ground. You don't do that, right? Threshing, that which includes all treatment such as beating, thrusting, shaking, peeling, pressing, to divide that which is of use for food or work and that which is not. The idea of separating the wheat from the chaff. And then it becomes more, we do another level of it. That's the first level of separation. Second level of separation is called the winnowing, selecting, sifting. That which includes freeing the useful from the useless stuff. Right? So we might have begun by going through one process of separating the stems and whatever from the product, right? Now, after it's dried, we winnow it, which is to throw it up in the air, and the chaff blows away in the wind, and the flour itself, separating and the wheat itself falls to the ground. The chaff blows away. That's the idea of it. Grinding. That which includes cutting a natural product into little pieces or pulverizing it. So how does this apply to us is that one should be careful when, for instance, you're making a salad. Right? I have a sister-in-law who is by nature both an artist and a cook. And they come together very often, and she now is making sushi in Israel. Right?
Wow.
And her sushi is gorgeous, as you could imagine. It is a work of art. But also, it's called Efrat Sushi, by the way. Do a plug, yeah. Sakura Sushi, Efrat Sushi. But one of the things that we had to tell Sarasima was that when you're making egg salad on Shabbos, as opposed to before Shabbos, you have to be careful not to cut the ingredients. She would cut every ingredient, whether it's potatoes or eggs or onions, by hand in exactly the same cubic size. So there would be matching cubes of every kind of ingredient in the salad. It was amazing, right? But you can't do that on Shabbos, right? Because that's too close to grinding. You should actually be cutting things a little more roughly than you would normally do it if you have to prepare it on Shabbos. If you're preparing before Shabbos, no issue. So that's grinding. Kneading. That which is compounding a paste by means of water. So I'll give you an example of that. When you're making hummus, right? One of the things that happens is when you add water to tahina, initially it becomes thicker. Then it becomes thinner. So there's a danger that you're turning it into a thicker paste by adding the water to it, which is a big danger. You can't do that, right? You can't make concrete on Shabbos. It's forbidden to do. So if you're able to make it thinner, that usually is okay. But making it in such a way that kneading, it becomes like kneading, it's thickening it. Okay, so generally we're going to get to all kinds of cooking. Baking, which includes changing the natural condition of produce by means of fire. All right, so baking is a dry form of cooking. Shearing, that's which includes detaching So all of these things we've just talked about up to now also would produce very good dyes. This is a way of producing dyes. Okay. Now we have shearing. That which includes detaching from the animal's body outgrowths of the body, whether it is in order to obtain material to work upon or in order to change the appearance of the body. So you can't give your sheep a haircut on Shabbos to make him look better either, let alone take his wool. Carding. That which includes hackling and generally reducing stuff for spinning into fibers. So first you cut, and then they card it, and then it gets spun into a thread. Dyeing. That's which includes every method of coloring materials. So this is a problem that we run into on a regular basis when you're cleaning something up. Right? Somebody spills the wine on Shabbos. Not an unusual problem, right? How do you clean it up? If you take a towel and clean it up, you're dyeing the towel. Right? You're not supposed to do that on Shabbos, right? If you take Kleenex, you can't use the Kleenex as a sponge for fear that you'll squeeze it, which you can't do. But you could just lay it on the spot and then pick it up and throw it away, because Kleenex you don't save. The fabric you do save, right? So it's a concern that you have. Some people have purple towels that they have just for this purpose on Shabbos, because it doesn't change color when you mop up something purple with a purple towel, right? But a white towel changes color. This is one of the arguments, interestingly enough, with making tea and coffee. You start with a clear liquid, right, and it turns brown, right? So is that dyeing? Right? We won't get into the details of it, but it's something to think about. Spinning. That which includes every twining of fibers into threads. So, they have these ties that you use for closing plastic bags, right? It's a little bit of a problem to use them to tie something closed, because you're spinning it. That's what you're actually doing at that point.
What about when you tie your shoelaces?
It's a very good question. If you tie your shoelaces in such a way that it's what we call a bow, that you just with one finger can untie it, we don't view it as tying a knot, right? If you need two fingers to undo it, then it does.
It becomes difficult.
Right. This is also true with, for instance, a necktie. Right, a necktie is untied by pulling one side. It's a slip knot, right? So it's okay. But, for instance, I'll give you an example of a problem that we run into quite frequently, not so much now because of Velcro, is that on Shabbos morning, when you take the Torah out, and it used to be that it was tied with a satin rope that went around it, right? It would go around a couple of times and then tie it, right? So if you tied that, say, in a square knot, right, that was viewed as a permanent knot, and you can't do that on Shabbos, right? It wasn't a problem because at Mincha, it would come untied. It didn't stay tied for the full day, right? But the Mincha tying, right, doesn't get untied until the Monday, when the Torah gets taken out again. So that's a much bigger problem when they take the Torah out on Mincha, how you tie it up, right? And what people used to do is actually just put it around 2 or 3 times and then twist it underneath to hold it. Now there are often belts with clasps on it or Velcro, and it solves the problem. Right? But it was one of the issues, right?
So what you're talking about is 39 different separations and differentiations for the week, and then a cessation, which is another separation on the 7th day.
Well, we have to recognize them during the week, for sure, and then not do them on...
So the question is, you have 2 different groupings of separation and differentiations. You have during the week and on Shabbos.
No, it's the same thing, as you treat them differently.
Well, you're not doing it. As soon as you stop doing, it's another form of separation and differentiation. Because it's, one is a positive, I'm going to use the Rambam from his commandments. One is a positive set of commandments we do on 6 days, and then we do not do them.
No, but that doesn't apply here, because there's no requirement to do these things during the 6 days. Right? There's no requirement to do these things unless you're building Mishkan. right? There's no requirement to do these things. We do them. Very few of us do all of them during the week.
Well, I wouldn't call them commandments, but I would call them a different form of separation and differentiation during the week.
For me, I have to tell you, before I was conscious of Shabbos, I wasn't conscious of Malachas at all.
I know.
Then I learned about Malachas, and I would often pause during the week and say, oh, I'm doing this, right? I'm separating, I'm doing, or I'm plowing, whatever I'm doing, right? It would be interesting for me to note it. But it wasn't in a sense that, for instance, Pesach, right? Pesach, there's a prohibition against eating, right? Chametz, right? You're forbidden to eat chametz on Pesach, right?
But just before Pesach, you fast.
You fast, but there's another requirement on Pesach, right? Which is you must eat matzah on the first day of Pesach.
All
right?
separations.
Right? So, but what I'm saying is that those requirements are not true with the Malachas, in the sense that these Malachas are forbidden on Shabbos, but there's no requirement to do these Malachas during the week. That's not a requirement. We often do them in the process, writing. We write during the week, right? We do them as part of our process of life, of making a living, of doing whatever it is that we do, right? But we don't necessarily recognize them, and we certainly don't feel I am fulfilling a commandment by writing. I may be fulfilling a commandment by making parnasa through writing, or doing a kindness through writing.
What strikes me about Shabbos as opposed to the rest of the week is that it's a very marked separation.
Absolutely.
And differentiation. And I just have much more time to think about God and communicate with my wife and kids.
Right.
Than I would during the rest of the week, where I'm running around like a chicken without a head.
Shabbos is the fulfillment of the requirements of all modern psychiatrists of quality time.
Quality time.
Right? Quality time with your maker, quality time with your family.
And not quality time with your iPad.
Right. Your iPad doesn't know, right? Your maker knows and your family knows, right? We should never confuse inanimate objects with those things, right? It's an opportunity for that, really. By the way, it doesn't replace quantity time, but it is important quality time, in people's lives.
I guess the question that I really have is that this notion of doing a whole variety of different separations during the week, and then stopping them and doing more separations. And what does that mean for being Jewish?
Look, being Jewish is, I say this often, probably too often, a large part of being Jewish is being discriminating.
Discriminating, differentiating.
Right. Yeah. And discriminating, used to be a sign of a refined person. Now it tends to be the sign of a racist person, the same words, right? But I'm using it in the former manner, right? Is that one should always have an awareness, so that, there is a constant return in the Torah to saying, I've made this and this. I've asked you to do this, but not this, right? It's always this process of realizing that there are many, many separations in this world, and we really are encouraged not to cross those lines in the strongest words. Things like, plowing with two animals, mixing fabrics, kalayim,
wool and cloth.
Yeah, wool and cotton, right? One is from animal, one is from the ground. We don't mix the two, right? Shatnez, right? And that's derisive, right? By the way, they do mix it in the Mishkan. Right, because the Mishkan is viewed as another level of reality in which different laws apply. The best way for me to describe it is that our writer has often pointed out that in our world, we understand if something is not forbidden, that it's permissible. Right? It may not be the smartest thing in the world to do it, but if it's not forbidden, we understand that we probably can do it. In the Mishkan, it's the opposite. Right? In the Mishkan, everything is forbidden except what you are required to do. Right? So it's a different way of approaching. If you think there are restrictions on Shabbos, Mishkan becomes much, because you're in the king's palace at that point.
That's right.
As opposed to being,
right.
in his city, right? Then the formality of it is much more strict. But I think that Shabbos is intended to give us, among other things, an awareness of the structure of the universe, that there are many, many separations, right? And those separations are not meant to be statements of this is good and this is bad. It's much more, the whole question of understanding Tahara and Tamea, what is badly translated as purity and impurity, has so many elements to it that require deep, deep thought to appreciate them. That to understand that as clean and dirty is just a disaster, in the process. And it's true of all these malachas. It's true of the nature of Shabbos. There's an overriding understanding that Shabbos is set aside for something unique in the universe, right? And that we should.
I think you're on the right track with that.
Right? And all of the guideposts are there. Shabbos is one of the things that's called an ois, a sign. Tefillin is called a sign. Bris Milah is called a sign. There are not many signs. These are all signs of the relationship of God and the Jew. Right? A non-Jew, it's a capital crime for a non-Jew to keep Shabbos. Halachically, it's a capital crime. So, for instance, when somebody's in the middle of conversion, right, there's a big question. On Monday he's a Gentile. On Tuesday he's Jewish.
It's a pretty abrupt role change.
How does he make this change?
Yeah.
He was completely not Jewish on Monday. Right? He went to the mikveh Tuesday, and he's completely Jewish. He has no idea how to keep Shabbos, because he's forbidden to keep Shabbos. No, that's not true. What he's allowed to do is not keep Shabbos perfectly. So if you're instructing a non-Jew, and he's learning, say, a year, preparing for this moment of conversion where he's going to have tests and understanding, live through the Jewish calendar for a year, all the elements involved in it, right? Then he's getting ready, and he's getting very good. He's very serious about his process, keeping Shabbos. He really wants to keep Shabbos, and you have to remind him, at some point, go and turn a light switch on and off, right? Mm-hmm. You have to do it, because you want to work within this structure, right? This structure says you can't keep Shabbos. You can't keep Shabbos. So that's a process, right? Because Shabbos is given uniquely. It is a sign for us. It doesn't mean that we have Shabbos to take advantage of other people. In fact, we know that those that are working for us, we don't work them on Shabbos, specifically. Let's move on, because we're only up to 16. We got a ways to go. How are we doing?
Go ahead.
All right. Spinning, which includes every twining of fibers into threads. 17, 18, and 19 are setting up the warp, drawing through the heddles, weaving, and generally all the interlacing of threads or other materials for the purpose of weaving. So it's setting up really a loom and using it. Right? 20, separating. This is a very important one. Threaded strands for the sake of weaving. So after they've been put together, you need to separate which ones you want to use when. That you definitely have to. Tying a knot. This is all part of making a carpet, right? Or parochas in this case. Right? Untying a knot in order to tie again. So if your tzitzit are loose, the knots in your tzitzit are loose, you shouldn't tighten them on Shabbos. You wait till after Shabbos to do it. But you should check them on Friday. It's a good idea during the day. Serving together, which includes every permanent joining of two pieces. Sewing together,
mm-hmm.
which includes every permanent joining of two pieces of material with threads, or the child of this malacha, the Sav malacha, would be gluing. You can't glue things because it's like sewing, right? And now we know gluing is often used as a substitute for sewing in manufacturing today. All tearing, if not done with merely a destructive intent. So one of the issues people have is if I open up a can of pop, now I've created a vessel by doing it. So some people, when they open up the can of pop, will puncture the bottom of it as well and let it drain through, so that they haven't created a vessel at that point. What they've done is actually destroyed a vessel. That you can't do on Shabbos. You shouldn't create a vessel, because as long as it was sealed, you couldn't use it for storing liquids. The moment you pour the Coca-Cola out of it, or if it should be Coca-Cola, the moment you pour the Tropicana orange juice out of it, then it becomes an empty vessel which you've created, which is good for storage. You don't want to do that, right? So I'll give another example: is when you open up potato chips, right? Rather than just open it so that you can then seal it again later, if you're using it on Shabbos, you really should tear the whole side of it out open. And if you need to store those potato chips after Shabbos, you would do it in a different vessel at the end of it, not put it back in that bag. Catching game, which includes bringing an animal under human control, or, for instance, trapping a bee in your sukkah. You have to be careful about that. Slaughtering, namely every complete or partial disturbance of an animal organism. Flaying, that's skinning an animal. Treatment of the skin for leather by means of tanning, currying, milling. These are all elements of preparing the skin as a hide. And again, we know that this was used in Mishkan for the roof. Scraping the skin, which includes any smoothing of it. Marking out, and so you're preparing to mark the skin in order to do it. This, in fact, involves drawing lines. Cutting, which includes every fashioning or dividing into parts. Writing. Erasing for the purpose of rewriting. So the malacha, the rabbinic malacha of this, is one that happens on every birthday party. When people have a birthday party and it says, "Happy Birthday Shmuel" on it, right? Can you eat that piece of birthday cake? And the answer is you shouldn't on Shabbos, right? So you'll notice what many people do is they ask the words to be written on a chocolate disc or on a cookie, and the cookie is placed on the cake, and you can remove the cookie, put it in the fridge, and after Shabbos you can eat it, right? But you don't do it on Shabbos. Now, from an Av Malacha point of view, it's really not a problem, because it says erasing for the purpose of rewriting. Building. That's what includes every combination of articles by means of cohesion, adhesion, and weight, as well as every preparation for the building of a house. So this includes parts of a house. You can't put together a cabinet. You don't fix a handle on Shabbos that's connected to the house, right? If it's not connected to the house, it's not as serious an issue. For instance, if you have, let's say, this structure here needed to be fixed, right? It'd be better not to for other reasons, but it's very different than if it's actually built into the wall, right? Because then you're adjusting the house itself, fixing a window, something like that. Demolishing for improved building, rebuilding, including any destruction for the purpose of construction. So when you dig a hole, right, are you digging the hole because you want to create a foundation, or because you need the earth for another purpose, right? I'm taking the earth for another purpose. That's not building a foundation. But if you're building a foundation and taking the dirt out, it's a bigger problem, right? Kindling. That which every promotion of burning which is not done with merely a destructive intent. Specifically, this involves cooking, and this involves lighting candles. Extinguishing for the purpose of obtaining charcoal. So if the purpose of charcoal is that they would burn coal into a form that it could be used for charcoal, and then stops the burning process at that point. Beating with a hammer, makiv patish, that is the final stage. Beating with a hammer, this comprises all work upon vessels which one applies to fit the finishing touch, up to the last knock with the hammer, or the shaking off of the remaining fibers. So this raises a very interesting concept, is that whether a vessel is made by a Jew or not depends on this. Makiv patish, the last blow. Right? So if a non-Jew, in principle, constructed your coffee maker, but a Jew put the final screws into the coffee maker, which made it functional, right? We view it as having been produced by a Jew, that final stage. This impacts people dramatically when they have to toivel something. When something is not owned by a Jew, certain things, you have to put it into the mikveh, right? And it's not koshering, it's actually changing ownership from a non-Jew to a Jew. So if you were to buy it from a Jew and it had been toiveled, right, you probably wouldn't have to toivel it. But if you went and bought it at, say, a store, right, and you didn't think it was produced by a Jew, you would have to do it. Mm-hmm. What happens when the process of toiling will destroy the appliance? Very serious problem, right? Now, it used to be for things like kettles and stuff like that, electric kettles, if you toiveled it, you have to immerse it 100% completely, right? That if you let it dry for a couple of days, and you're using sweet water, not salt water, that you hadn't done any damage to it, and that you could use it. It would be fine. Now there are other issues, because there are very often chips in these machines that control them, right? And you can destroy them even with fresh water, right? So there is an argument among some poskim that the solution to it is to take apart the product enough so that it doesn't function, right? That a Jew will do that, right? And then put it back together so that it will function. Now it's makeh b'patish by a Jew, it's finished by a Jew, right? The product is Jewish, and it doesn't require the toiling at that point, right? So it's one of the ways of dealing with this, right? The last of the malachas is carrying from a private to a public domain, or vice versa. So this all comes from the Gemara, Shabbos 73a and b. Mm-hmm. We won't go beyond this. These are the Av Malachas at this point, and there isn't much explanation that we've done with it, but we've just set it out. Next week we'll begin the details of what are the toldos, the children of the Malachas, and begin to learn the significance of it.